Hello, my name's Lesley Atherton, and this is a monologue called Mr Olivetti Titmuss. What's that? Yes, oh God, yes, I can tell you all about Mr T. Have a seat for now and I'll get you a cuppa when we've finished our little chat. Well, what do you want me to tell you? I'm sure you know by now that Mr Olivetti Titmuss is his official name, but he's always known around here, in the village, as Mr T. I mean, always, right from when he was out of short pants. I think it started when he was in school, you know, with his name being a bit rude and all that, so they got around it by calling him Mr T, and it stuck. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting it engraved on his headstone, heaven help him. I'm a bit confused exactly what it is that you want to know about him, my dear. Anything in particular? Just waffle on. Ha ha ha, all right, my dear. I can certainly do that if you're sure. Yes? Well, I know it seems a bit, odd, but the first thing everyone, and I mean everyone, notices about Mr Olivetti Titmuss is his unusual walk. Well, it's more of a waddle, really. He always walked with a waddle. Actually, not just a waddle. Think of the gait of a duck, then have it stand on one of its feet while it tries to move and stay upright, and you'll have some idea of Mr T's walk. How odd that I should think of it like that. Oh, but what a very nice man he is. He's got the heart and soul of an English gent, but the waddle's always the first thing everyone notices. Do you know, this is trickier than I expected. I'm trying to describe somebody I've known all his life, lived next to since before he was born, and seen almost every day since then. I don't want to speak ill of anyone, but thinking about it properly, God rest his mother's soul, I think that he's probably, a bit odd, and it doesn't help that his waddle gives him a pear-shaped lady walk. His feet point outwards like a ballerina's, and his bottom points outwards and backwards, so much so that he almost looks taller when he sits down. Oh, I shouldn't say it really, I shouldn't. Is it what you're after? Oh, good. Yes, he's rather a large chap, large and bottom heavy and waddly with those teeny tiny feet. Ah, yes, I know what you mean. Maybe I am a bit obsessed with his duck walk. But he always wears the same brown leather brogues, flat and chunky at the front, and they are even more duckish than duck's feet. They look like the first school shoes my little niece ever wore, in 1972, I think it was. Oh, she was a pretty thing, and her hair was in the sweetest bunches, and her first day at school, she was terrified. Oh, yeah, sorry, my dear. Yes, we were talking about Mr Olivetti Titmuss. Well, I don't get many visitors, and yeah, he's a big man. Oh, yes. Almost always wears these bulky and enormous baggy pants, which make his bottom half even more duck-like. Poor love. In fact, thinking about it, his face also has a bit of a wading bird about it too. His eyes are small and black, and his lips pucker and pout, and he really is quite a dribbler. Started when he was a baby, and we all thought he would grow out of it, but he never did. Perhaps it's something to do with the duck thing, likes being near water, so makes his own for lubrication or something, you know. And you know what? The more I think about it, the more I realise that he's an ugly bugger. Especially that blobby alcoholic's nose with red veins and the unhappy brown mole perched on the side. Even his tufty hair is feather-like. He's more duck-like than most ducks, and that's just not attractive in a human being, is it? I tell things as they are. He is not a good-looking man, poor duck. What about his personality? That's a good point. Yes, you can see everything I've told you just by looking at a photograph. Let's just say that he's nice and he's neighbourly. If you had a problem and called on Mr T, he would go out of his way to help. In fact, he tries to help people with their problems even before they know they've got problems in the first place. He's that kind of chap. Ugly as sin, but nice as pie. I don't like to talk in clichés, but there you have it. He's as nice as a big juicy slice of duck pie. Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm glad you asked about that. Yet, I think he is lonely, poor Mr Olivetti Titmuss. Well, with him being so duck-like and waddly, he never really seemed to have a lady friend. I never saw him even talk to a lady, and we've lived next door to each other for over 20 years, since his parents died. And he definitely wasn't allowed a lady friend before that. Oh, yes, remember he cared for both parents, and when they died, he was devastated, poor little fellow. I just think he never had enough confidence to talk to ladies. With a nose like that, he was never going to be a Lothario, though, was he? Oh, yes, I know. I'm getting to it. The speed dating. Don't rush me, or I'll forget the interesting bits. So, anyway, He obviously had hopes of meeting someone. He didn't want to be on his own forever. I know that because before all this unpleasantness started, Mr T was in the process of getting himself a girlfriend. I know, and I can't pretend I wasn't surprised. He'd read, I think it was in the Mirror or Mail or something like that, he'd read that speed dating was the future. I know he wanted to believe that. And yes, I remember taking a cup of tea out to him in the front garden as he Brillo-padded the algae off the garden gnomes, and he told me he was feeling excited about it. He couldn't wait to meet the girl of his dreams at the Liberal Club that night. Oh, he's such a nice man. We were all so excited for him, and I can't believe that the Liberal Club was where all this horrid mess started. Speed dating is so sordid, isn't it? I would never do anything so utterly seedy. I think Mr T's experience proved it isn't something that good people do. Yes, I know, I'm getting to it. So yes, I believe he got himself washed and dressed and had a delicious salad for his tea. Really, he ate like a bird, and nobody can imagine where his chubbiness came from. I went in later, of course, to give him moral support and a nice bit of syrup sponge with clotted cream. He did love my cooking. He'd tried with his appearance, and he looked grand for him. And yes, he was fine as I saw him off for the speed dating. I didn't approve even then, but as I say, he was ready for a bit of fun. Afterwards, once he was over the shock and everything, he told me that it wasn't at all like he'd expected. The people were shallow and not so nice. He said one of the ladies had black hair, which was less like hair and more like a fake fur cap, apart from where the grey roots sneaked a peep. He'd found it disgusting. Oh, that poor man hadn't seen much of the world. The whole experience was a shock and a revelation. Even these cheap women who dyed their hair were a bit too much for him, and that's without any of the more distasteful stuff. That came later. Anyway, yes, I'm getting to it. He met a lady who seemed to like him, and she wrote his name on her card. That means she wouldn't mind seeing him again, but she was the only one. Of course, I'm not being bitchy, and I'm not surprised about that at all, but Mr T was grateful to even get one lady showing interest. They talked at the bar, and she offered to walk him home, and even ended up asking to spend the night with him. He'd found his first ever lady friend just like that, with virtually no effort. Well, as I said before, I was already in town for the WI meeting and I couldn't help myself. I have to confess that curiosity got the better of me and I went to see how he was doing. Just peeped my head round the doorway of the Liberal Club. So when I saw he was chatting to a new lady friend, I was chuffed to bits and, well, yes, I must confess that I followed them both home, at a discreet distance, of course. I don't normally do that kind of thing, but I wanted to protect my little friend. He was such a nice boy, ugly and revolting even as a 2-year-old, but I was delighted that she seemed to see past all that. Anyway, I ended up outside my house, watching as best I could through the binoculars. I listened too, of course, and they seemed to be getting on so well, at first, but it all turned in just a moment. Personally, I was shocked at the brazenness of this so-called lady. Do you know she started taking her clothes off in the living room, didn't even draw the curtains. Anybody could have been watching, and I was. I can't believe what happened next. She threw her cardigan, then her blouse and her bra onto the sofa. Mr T looked at her and was dribbling even more than usual. I personally don't think he'd ever seen a real woman in the flesh before, and there she was, the newly widowed Mrs Taylor, semi-naked and there for the taking in his living room. Oh, I've just realised, Mr and Mrs T. Ha! Well, who'd have thought it? Perhaps they were meant to be together after all. Anyway, I was watching them both, just to protect him, you understand. I kind of took him under my wing when his parents were no more, as you know, out of the goodness of my heart, of course. So as I was saying, a topless Mrs T giggled away over to the open curtains and shut them dramatically, saying how she was no exhibitionist. I have to say that I disagree with that. She is a most scrubberish lady, and her breasts are enormous. My mother, God rest her, would have had plenty to say about that brazen tart. Of course, I wasn't overly impressed that I couldn't see him any more because I had wanted to keep an eye on Olivetti, just as his mother would have wished. She told me so on her deathbed, so I've no qualms at all that I did the right thing. It could have been worse because, even from behind the curtains, I could still hear what was going on if I put my ear to the window pane. There was female laughing and talking, and the odd grunt from Mr T. Then there was silence. I was beginning to wonder if they'd both fallen asleep, but I knew it wasn't the case when I heard the most enormous scream. I wasn't sure who or where it was coming from at first. Mr Olivetti Titmuss had never screamed before, not as far as I knew. I didn't know what to do. Well, you know, I was shocked, of course, and couldn't move, and then tumbling out of the door with the look of a weighty and overbalancing duck on roller skates came Mr T. Well, you've never seen anything like it. He was sweating, he was red-faced, and he looked like he'd accidentally eaten a mouldy carp. Oh, so sickly looking he was. Obviously, I didn't want him to know that I'd been watching, so I tried to sneak round to the road and pretend I was sauntering home from a night out. I was lucky he was so upset that he didn't notice me at all. I crept into a more suitable location, shouted his name, and as I did, he turned to me, moaned, and collapsed to the floor. "What's happened? Where's that woman? Has she stolen from you the trollop? Are you unwell?" I was shouting at him, but he didn't even seem to hear me, no matter how close I got or how loudly I yelled. But then he started mumbling something about her, and I stopped yelling and started listening. He mumbled about things being all wrong and dirty and soiled, and I couldn't get any clarity from him. As you can imagine, I was wondering what on earth had been going on in there. So I left him on the floor and ran into her. Curiosity got the better of me again, you see. It's a personal trait I don't admire in myself, but I deal with it the best I can. Like Mr Olivetti Titmuss, we all have our crosses to bear. When I got into the living room, she was still there, bold as brass, just sitting on the sofa. I was glad to see that she had the sense to look confused and had at least put some of her clothes back on. She asked me who I was, so I reminded her I was Mr T's neighbour and that she would have known me if she'd have ever graced the doors of God's house. Oh, she gave me such a look that I asked her if she'd done something to hurt him. And you know, she just stared at me, the brazen tart, and actually ignored my question. But it was obvious, even to me, that something had gone wrong. I tried another angle completely and asked her if it was his duck waddle that had put her off. That was when she shrieked. He thought I was disgusting, not the other way around. I didn't much like the look of her myself, but even I thought that this was a bit extreme, so I waited for her to tell me more. "I was taking my clothes off," she said, "and I was doing a bit of a striptease for him." I knew she was a hussy, but I kept listening. Oh, how the other half live. It might be wrong, but we owe it to ourselves to hear about it, don't we? You know, to protect ourselves from sin and all that. I took off my skirt and asked him if he wanted me to take off my knickers. He said yes, so I thought everything was okay. That was when I pulled them down, and that was when he exploded. Well, I didn't want to know that, I thought, but kept listening. He shouted at me, "You've got a beard." And then he ran out of the house. I don't think he's ever seen a lady naked before. I didn't like to tell her that, in my opinion, he still hadn't seen a lady naked. She was certainly a biological woman, but no lady would offer herself in a striptease. Well, would she? Not a chance. I knew you'd agree with me. So that's it. I left her in the house and went out to see how Mr T was doing. He was in a rather large heap, looking more duck-like than ever. He kept saying over and over that she was a freak of nature. I didn't like to approach this subject of the normality of female pubic hair, as he was obviously far more innocent than I'd realised. Poor duck. I helped him to his feet. The last words he said to me that day were, "Peggy, I really think that poor lady was deformed." Poor Mr Olivetti Titmuss. Where is he now, do you know? Oh, really? Oh, well, I think that's the best place for him. I don't think he's cut out for living in the modern world, the poor boy. And tell me again why you're asking me all the questions. Is he in trouble? Oh, yes, I see. Local newspaper. Piece on 40-year-old virgins. Mrs Taylor wrote in, giving his name. Well, she would, wouldn't she? She's that way inclined. A bit of a stirrer, I reckon. I didn't realise you were reporters. How interesting. 40-year-old virgins, Listen, stay for a cup of tea and let's have another chat. There's a 65-year-old one here who's got a lot to say and he's just dying to be famous.